welcome. Just want to mention, like, I guess, whatever, like last week, this week, I mentioned last week, my parents, passed away a week apart, 10 years and 1 week apart. So last Shabbos was my mother's yortzeit. She passed away first, and 10 years later, my father, Alav Shalom, passed away. So I want to dedicate the shir, Rav Chaim Yosef ben Harav Tzvi Yehuda. I'm named for my grandfather, who I never knew, who passed away a young man. I think many people probably here knew my father well. He was a rabbi in Toronto for over 50 years, and then the same shul, and did a lot of wonderful things. And I can't say the most one. I know he would say the most wonderful thing he did was bringing up his children, but it's hard for me to say something like that. But anyways, the neshama should have an aliyah, and we should have happy occasions to celebrate all together. Okay. We left off last week. We were in Perek Sheni, the middle of Mishnah, Dalid, where we got back to, we're still Rabban Gamliel ben Osha Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, and then we switched over to Hillel. And the last thing we left off is I quoted my father, not to judge somebody till you come to his place. And we said sort of, you can never be in somebody's place. It's impossible, both in a literal sense, of course. If somebody occupies a space and you go there, then he's not there anymore. And of course, even in a more non-literal sense, we can never fully understand other people, all the motivations and the factors and the background. And that's why we don't judge people. Only God judges people. Unfortunately, a court sort of sometimes has to judge people, but that's more or less to keep law and order, that we don't have a choice. But to assess people, that's not the responsibility, or that's not man's role. Okay, then we say, Altomar davar she'i afshar lishmoa shesofo lishamea. So it's a little bit unclear what this, it's written kind of cryptically, which I think is part of the point. Do not say, Al Tomar Davar, do not say a thing, She'iev Sharli Shmoa, that can't be heard, Shesofoli Shamea, because in the end it will be heard. So what exactly does it mean? So the simple explanation the commentaries say is never share a secret. As the Tiferet Yisrael, he actually quotes the expression, if I can hear it, those Naim Lakotel. The walls have ears, which, I may have thought growing up, that was sort of a modern day expression invented in America. But the Tiferet Yisrael, living 150 years ago, wrote, "Those Naim Lakotel, the walls have ears. The up hashamayim yolichat hakol, and the birds, the heavenly birds, will transport whatever you say." And the Bartanura says, when there's a secret, you shouldn't even tell it to yourself. You shouldn't even speak a secret out loud to yourself. I assume what he's saying is you think you're talking to yourself. There's somebody overhearing. We know that's true today. I think you probably all heard the stories on Zoom. People go to have their Zoom on and they don't realize they're half naked, and all kinds of things going on. It's very, very, very dangerous in these world, because there is, as we said, there's Google cameras are watching everything we do. So even to yourself, Bartanur, he figured that one day, there are no secrets in the world. So that's one explanation. Do not, if you want a secret, don't say anything. And we know halachically, a lot of people, I think I mentioned this a few weeks ago, Vayedaber Hashem Moshe Lemor, and God spoke to Moshe saying, I think we talked about this by the Seret HaDibrot. The word Lemor doesn't mean saying. I mean, that's how they translate in English. God spoke to Moshe saying. It means God spoke to Moshe to say over, to Lemor, to tell the Jewish people, because without that permission, it would have been prohibited. It's Lashon Hara. When somebody tells you something, the default position in Jewish law is when somebody tells you something, it's private. It's obviously it's much more complicated, and we're not going to give a shiur on Lashon Hara. And obviously, if somebody speaks in public, then we can assume he can repeat it because he knows it's not in public. It's sort of this idea. In public, in halachic term, here means only 3 people. The assumption is once 3 people know something, and sometimes less, but if you say something in front of 3 people, in other words, anything I say in this shiur, you can repeat, even if I say don't repeat it, probably. Because if I don't want to repeat it, don't want to know, and you don't go onto a shiur that's videoed and 25 people listening, and they can spread to whoever they want. So we have to assume whenever somebody tells us something in private, we're not allowed to repeat it. So lay more means to God gave permission to Moshe to say over what he said to the Jewish people. Now that sounds a little bit strange. Obviously, the whole point of the Torah is the Jewish people. That's actually not as simple as it sounds. It may be as simple for the last like 2,000 years, but I think it's the Beit Halevi, Rav Chaim Soloveitchik, who we just spoke about, sort of the anti-faster rabbi, the Machmir on Pikuach Nefesh. So his father, the Beis Halevi, the famous, in our world, Rav Yosef Dov Ber Soloveitchik of Yeshiva University, Boston, New York, was named after his great-grandfather. So I think he has an essay in his work that really this is the difference between the first Luchot and the second Luchot. Originally, the Torah was meant to be much simpler. You went to the Urim V'Tumim in the Beit HaMikdash, you got yes or no answers. They didn't meant all this complicated analysis to do all that stuff. It sounds a little bit strange because we kind of people who learn that stuff, it's wonderful, it's intellectually exciting, but the Torah was originally really not meant to be so detailed, or at least not for the average person to be so difficult. But so there is an idea, even Torah, that God gave to Moshe. You needed the idea of lamor. You have to be, everything's a secret. So everything's secret. So you cannot reveal something unless you're given explicit permission. And like I say, if you say something in public, that's considered explicit permission. So that's the first way the commentaries explain it. Altomar davar she'ev, don't think it can't be heard. The Altomar davar she'ev shar lishmo. You think it's not possible to hear? Believe me, the walls of ears shall fully shamir, something we'll hear. But going back to what we were talking about last week, how the Tiferet Yisrael explains this whole Mishnah, really talking about leadership, Alti Froshmin Hatzibur, and the whole idea is talking on leaders, or the Mishnah before. So he says it's talking about that it's especially leaders. Of course, it's everybody has to talk very clearly. You have to be articulate when you speak, and you have to make yourself clearly understood. You know, I'm sure many of you know that we don't have rabbinic smicha anymore. There's no such thing as a rabbi. I can say as a rabbi that we don't have rabbis anymore. What do we have rabbis? We have teachers. The real smicha that Moshe Rabbeinu gives to Yoshua, we'll read in a couple of weeks, Ish mipi ish, that was lost in the Rav Yehuda ben Baba, one of the Surah Harugei Malchut. It was lost after the Roman persecution of the Jews, and it had to be handed down from one generation to another. And that smicha allowed you to be a member of the High Court, this Sanhedrin. Today, we don't have that smicha. We just have what's called heter hora'ah, permission to issue rulings. Somebody is intelligent and knows a lot, so that's the person who asks questions. But we all know in Judaism, everybody knows, a rabbi has no, unlike in the Catholic priesthood, a rabbi has no special powers that anybody else doesn't have. But they don't even have an official position, really. We just called it smicha, heter ra. So the Gemara in Sanhedrin, where it talks about smicha, there were three types of smicha they used to give in the time of the Gemara. What we call, most rabbis today have what we call yora. It's really a question. Yora. Yadin. Yatir bechorot. Yora means, can he issue rulings on hora'ah, isser v'heter, what we call ritual law. Kashrut is the chicken kosher. Is right. So that's what we call Yora. And today, most traditional smicha programs really don't make sense for the modern world, but that's a whole different question. They learn Yora Dea Chelek Aleph. You learn Basar B'chalev, Hilchot Tarobet, mixture, the meat pot. You put some fleshik in the meat pot and cooked. It was used 24 hours ago. All these halakhic questions. So that was Yora. When it comes to ritual law, then you had Yadin. Yadin means to sit on civil law. Two people are the landlord and a tenant. Somebody paid money to go on vacation, and then COVID canceled the vacation. You have to give the money back. So that's what we call Yadin. Can he judge? Choshen Mishpat. And today, when you get Yadin Smicha, it includes sort of Even Ezer, marriage, divorce, those, etc. That whole area of Jewish law. That's a much harder Smicha to get, and not so many people have that. Yadin, yes. And so the answer is Yadin. He's qualified. And Yatir Bechorat, we don't have that today. The halacha of Bechorah, firstborn animal, that's to be dedicated, given to the Kohen, and if it has a mum, if it has a little blemish, it can't be brought as a sacrifice. It's the whole story of the Churban Habayit. Kamsan Bar Kamsat, remember, he put a little blemish by the eye or by the lip, and there's a whole debate. Is that a blemish? Does that make it disqualified? for the that caused the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. I mean, obviously there's more to it, but the way the Gemara presents the story was caused because Bar Kamsa placed a little bit of a blemish. And the rabbi said, okay, for the Romans, what are we going to, we're going to start up? Maybe we wouldn't do it, but it's not such a terrible blemish. And we can't tell the Romans a little thing on the lip. So, and of course, no, but Bar Kamsa, Rav Zechariah ben Avkula said, we can't do that. People, and he insisted that he was, that we have to sacrifice it. People will say that, you kill somebody who brings a balmum. And then Gemara said, because of Rav Zechariah ben Avkulis, his anivus, his humility, it's a strange language, he wasn't willing to sort of see beyond the narrow confines of the halakhic construct in this area and see the broader picture. We lost the Beit HaMikdash, we lost everything. So the third type of smicha was yatir bechora, because you can't use the animal. The bechor has to be dedicated of any animal you have. So we're not farmers, we don't have bechor. And the Gemara says that Rav spent 18 months on a farm. Rav, the great sage who really established Babylonian Torah. Rav was a student of Rav Yehuda Nasi, and he came from Babel, went back to Babel, I believe, in the year 219. That's what the historians say. The year 19, he established the famous yeshiva in Surah. And that yeshiva lasted for over 800 years. And so Rav lived on a farm for 18 months. He wants to get smicha. No, it's like the old joke. I forget how it goes. If if the rabbi says, if this is this case, then this is the halakha. He doesn't know that. Is this the liver of the chicken? You have to know what the liver of the chicken is. You have to know what you're looking at. So Rav spent 18 months on a farm to learn the laws of what makes something a mum and what's an animal and how it's supposed to be. It's an amazing thing, really, 18 months. And why am I telling you all this? It's interesting. I hope you find it interesting. If not, you can let me know and I'll stop. But what the Gemara says, it's very nice he spent 18 months on a farm, but they weren't going to give him smicha unless he took classes in speech. When I went to Yeshiva University, one of the courses we had to teach was called speech. It was a one semester, a 3-credit course that was called. You had to learn not a rabbinic school. This is in college. In order to graduate Yeshiva College, I don't know if they still have that requirement. You had to take a course in speech. We were supposedly a liberal arts school. We don't have that in Canada really, in specialized, but in the States, you have to take a science and an art and an English, and you have to take a history, etc. So we had to take a speech course. We had to give 4 speech, a persuasive speech, a debate, different things. They want to teach you how to speak, how to organize your thoughts, how to present them properly. So the Gemara says that in order to get smicha, you don't want a teacher who's unclear. That would be terrible. It would be worse than nothing because people misunderstand them. So the requirement to get smicha is the guy has to be a good speaker. I don't think the Gemara doesn't mean, although I think it's a good idea, I mean, the Gemara doesn't mean he has to be a tremendous orator in terms of, his like Jonathan Sachs or Norman Lamb, different, or Joseph Lookstein, the great orators of the Jewish world. It's not talking about so much that, although I think that is a good thing. I think we've lost that skill. People sort of disdain that. People want a Dvar Torah. They don't want a sermon anymore. I think that's kind of sad, personally, even though I go to a shul where they call it the 7-minute Dvar Torah. That already tells you a lot. That the Dvar Torah is called the 7-minute Dvar Torah. It's done before laning, not before Musaf. Rotates, whatever. That's the style today. But there is something. You inspire people. Like a great speaker inspires people. But the Gemara is talking more a clear speaker. You need to have a clear speaker, but an inspiring speaker is even better. And I think it is an important talent for a rabbi is going to be in public service. Whatever, it depends on the people, whether it's all different, how much, yes, I mean, that shouldn't be, it's not the most important thing, how well you speak, because we know great speakers can do evil things also, because they can inspire people for evil. But anyway, what the Gemara is saying is all a long way, the way the commentaries explain, do not say, talk and way, what in the world did he say? Put it in modern terms, do not be a diplomat. You cannot talk in diplomatese or whatever that word is. Diplomats are trained to say a lot, to talk a lot and say nothing. That's how do you become a diplomat, because you can't say everything because you have to lie because you're in politics, and that's what politics is all about. And I say that half cynically and half truthfully. So we learned last week, heavy Zarber shoot, be very careful. Politician, that's the nature of the game. That's the way it works, which is why the Torah has a separate system. Politics and the religion don't don't mix in the Torah. Shevet, Yehud, and the Kohanim. It's a terrible thing when the religious leaders get involved in politics. That's how the Torah sees it. Obviously, we want our political leaders to follow the laws of the Torah. It's not talking about a secular state, but the idea that politics and religion mix is awful because politics is dirty. That's the nature. Our rabbis were well aware of that. So diplomats have to learn how to talk where they can be interpreted how, whatever comes up later, they say that's what they meant. Okay, whatever. So that's exactly how a rabbi is not supposed to speak. A teacher has to speak extremely clearly. People don't misunderstand him, etc. Okay, then he says like this. Okay, that's very important, how to speak articulately, clearly, etc. Okay, Val Tomar, and do not say, Lish efene eshene. It's also, the Hebrew is very beautiful. I mean, it sort of rhymes. Kish efene eshne. When I have time, when I can turn aside, lefanot is to turn aside. When I have time, I'm relaxed, I'm at home for 3 months because, the whole economy is closed down, whatever. I have a lot of time. So Baruch Hashem, I mean, not Baruch Hashem, but Baruch Hashem for the silver lining parts. When I have time, I will learn. Why shouldn't you say that? It's not a good idea because, of course, Shema lo tipana, you'll never have time. In other words, you make the time for anything important in life. We know the second question we get asked in Shamayim, where the Gemara says, after Nasata v'natata be'emuna, where your business dealings done faithfully, that's the most important thing, where you're honest in business, monetary dealing. That's we know what kind of a person you are, how you deal with money. Okay, if you can pass that question. Many people can't pass that question. They get to question 2. So question 2 is kabata itim laTorah. Did you set aside time for Torah study? And of course, we all know the word is koveya. You have to set aside. You have to make time. There's you're right. We live in the busiest society probably ever. We have so much leisure, but so much busyness at the same time. We all know that. We weekends and holidays, people didn't have that in another generation. But we're also busier than everybody ever was before. It's just the nature of life. So you have to make the time. And that's why many Daf Yomi Shiurim say do them at 6 in the morning, 6:30, less interruption, because we are busy. So you have to make the time. Again, the Tiferet Yisrael sees this whole Mishnah talking about leadership, says we're especially talking to leaders. We're especially talking to leaders who have to find time to learn. We know that rabbis, a successful rabbi, okay, so we know already, he has to be a good speaker, he has to spend 18 months on a farm, or whatever requirements he has to do. But once you become a rabbi, as we've mentioned many times, from Chaim Soloveitchik said, the job is not only eat on Shiva Sarvatamus, he had a lot of other things to say. He said that you should, the job of a rabbi, as we mentioned many times, is to help the poor, the widow, and the underprivileged. The rabbi has to close the Gemara. The Rosh Yeshiva keeps the Gemara open. The rabbi closes the Gemara. But close the Gemara, but he has to open it on occasion. So busy people, leaders have to find time to learn. We discussed last week that if you're osek b'tzarchei tzibur, if you're involved in communal work, you're exempt from the mitzvah Talmud Torah, and God gives you the reward as if you learned. What can you do? It's more important to do community service. Nonetheless, always a little bit. You always have to find, leadership has to find time to learning. He then has a side comment. I mentioned this last week. I think, the way that the Pirkei Yisrael commentary worked, like the Drish and the Prisha on the Shulchan Aruch, I have this in a few places. In the Mishnah Berurah, the same idea, where they write their basic commentary, and then they have long, I don't know if you want to call it a tangent, you could call it a tangent, or a further explication of what they're talking about. So they'll have, they'll write, like in the Mishnah Berurah, he writes the basic halacha, and then he wants to expand, he writes in the Bir halacha. He writes expansions. So you have the same thing in the Shulchan Aruch, the Drish and the Prisha. So you have it, the Pirkei Yisrael, you have the Yachin and the Boaz. You have where his basic commentary, and he sometimes goes on the side. You don't miss the basic commentary. If you want to further investigate, so he has a tangent, and he says that talking about finding time. So he gives a whole thing. What we've spoken about, the most important part of learning is review. People don't like that. People hate that. People don't like to review because, first of all, if you learn Daf Yomi, that's what's review. Who has time to do anything? But that's we've spoken many times. Daf Yomi is not really about knowledge. It's about learning. We discussed it. There's a mitzvah to learn Torah. There's a mitzvah to know Torah. Learning Daf Yomi can't know Torah unless you spend 5 hours a day or you're brilliant and gone through Shas already. But it's beautiful. But it's to spend an hour a day involved in Torah and to pick up a few things. I vaguely remember 7.5 years ago, sort of, this discussion, or, discussions come up. You're not really learning the material. It's impossible. The path is much too quickly. But in terms of learning, the mitzvah to know Torah, it's not the mitzvah just to learn Torah. You have to effectively learn Torah. So you know Torah. So the most important thing for knowing Torah is to review. We've discussed that. And that's, but people always like to feel they're going ahead. They don't like to review. I mentioned the Mesilat Yesharim in a different context. He's not really talking about learning. He's talking the most important things are the things we know, is to go over what we know, to make sure. He's talking on a moral level, and Musar. But the most important thing is to review. So the Pirkei goes on a long discussion about the importance of review. But what I want to say, what he adds, is two fascinating things. One says, an author of a book, before you publish anything, you got to read it over 100 times. It's one thing, this orally, is the least, people talk off the top of their heads and something comes up, and they're sort of here today. It's oral, it's in the air. Yes, people hear it. It's not quite the same thing. Once you write something down, written is permanent, which is, of course, why we didn't want to write down the oral law. Because once you write down the oral law, it becomes an inflexibility in the law. Once something is written, very hard, and the whole point of the oral law was to be responsive to the needs of the time. But okay, that's a shir we've alluded to before, and how the development of halakha works, how halakha is supposed to work. And halakha was they had to break the Torah, right, to write down the Mishnah, because it was a whole new system now. Once it's written, it's a whole different approach. So when you write, it's permanent. When you write, you better review it 5,000 times before every word. The question is, how far do you take it? We know the Soloveitchik family didn't write anything. They were perfectionists. Rav Yosef Dober Soloveitchik broke that rule a little bit, but even he didn't publish most of his stuff. And he published very little of his shiurim. It's his students, and even like Ala Tshuva was published, Pinchas Peli wrote it up, and it's other people. The Soloveitchik tradition was never to write anything, because they were always Rav Soloveitchik would give shiur 2 years in a row on the same masechet at times. I know people who told me that they were in a shiur 2 years in a row, and they learned whatever, Baba Kamat 2 years in a row. So he gave a whole explanation. Somebody would say, but Rabbi, last year you said something else, and the Rav Soloveitchik would yell at him. Who cares what I said last year? I'm learning it again this year. Perfection is the enemy of good, correct, but good is the enemy of great. So again, you have to find the balance. That's exactly our point, right? The Soloveitchiks took this to an extreme and were very, very hesitant to write something. So you have to obviously find a balance, but I think we all understand that. But then he adds a fascinating comment. He says, Masechet, and he mentioned it, Nedarim, Nazir, Erkin, Kitnia, Truma, and Me'ilah, Tamid, were never properly edited. Most of these are things, the laws don't apply so much anymore. I mean, in we don't really have Nazirim anymore, even though in theory it does. The famous Nazir of Yerushalayim, Rav David Cohen, that's Rav Kook's top student, and his son was the chief rabbi in Haifa, Rav Shar Yishuv Cohen. He was the Nazir, but anyways, and it's true, these Masechta people don't learn too much. There's not real Rashi, and so it's like and the Tvertio said, they didn't have time to edit them properly. They weren't gone over well enough, and the Gemaras are not so sharp. The truth of the matter, that's one of the reasons the Bavli is much more important than the Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi, there was already persecution. It was very hard. They couldn't properly edit it and refine it. The Bavli went over many times. It took hundreds of years. Before Rabbi Yehuda printed the Mishnah was a 60-year project. After the Bar Revolt, probably already in Yavne. But for sure, by Rabbi Akiva's time, they were already starting to write the Mishnah. It's not true. Rabbi Yehuda and Nasi didn't write the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda and Nasi was the final editor of many editors who were collating and getting information together for decades in order to have a perfect system. The Mishnah really is put together beautifully, and the literary part and how every chapter and how it flows. The Mishnah was a really, really worked upon work. The Yerushalmi didn't have that. The Bavli had it a little bit more. So anyway, you have to be very careful. So that's al davar. So when you have to find time, when there's something important, you have to find time, and especially leaders And of course, it's the leaders who write books often. You have to spend many times, and anybody who knows, when they go write a book, they go in seclusion for a while or something, often, and just try to write. Okay, let's continue the next Mishnah. In my system, I know in Pirkei Avot, different, different whatever numbers. Mishnah Hey, Hu Hayomer, Hillel. We're continuing on Hillel. Ein bor yirechet. V'lo am haaretz chasid. A bor, like in English. A bor means an empty pit. A bor, an empty person. Ein bor yirechet. A bor can't be somebody who fears sin, and an am haaretz can't be a chasid. So it's, if I don't know when to put that in, but like I say, we're Perek Beit Mishnah Hey. Should be Mishnah. It might be in your Mishnah Vav, but in mine it's Mishnah Hey. Hillel says, Ein bor yirechet. Below and an Amaretz can't be a pious person. So which is worse, a bor or an Amaretz? I want to see who's with us. Listening. Which do you think is worse? What's worse, a bor or what's worse? Worse, not to be a yirechet or not to be a Hasid? That actually perhaps a little bit easier. Right, so not being a Yirechet is worse. Not to be a Hasid, okay, you're not a Hasid. Not everybody can be a Hasid. But a Yirechet, everybody has to be a Yirechet. So right, that's all the commentaries explain. A bor is worse. What is a bor? A bor means he's empty. Bor reik, ein bo mayim, right? They threw Yosef into the pit. A bor reik. A bor is reik, empty. And as the Tiferet Yisrael explains, doesn't even have any derech eretz. In other words, a person's supposed to have, we learned last week, Yapet Talmud Torah, in derech eretz, you're supposed to have derech eretz and Talmud Torah. So the bor has neither. And remember, the Tiferet Yisrael explained derech eretz last week. He had different explanations. Earning a livelihood, secular education. He learned it as anava, our character traits. Derech eretz means that we get along well. We do the proper way of the world, the ways of the land, where our character is developed. So a bor doesn't have a developed character. He's nothing. So he cannot fear sin. So it's interesting. He says he can't fear sin, but he can fear God. What does that mean? So what does that mean is that he fears punishment. You can tell a person, you can tell a baby learns if you put your hand in a fire, it hurts. So you can tell even a bor, you can be a Yirei Elohim. It's very interesting what he says. It's not the way we normally understand Yirei Elohim. He says that fear of God here means a bor can fear punishment, but he can't fear sin. As sin, in other words, sin is wrong, even if there wouldn't be punishment. The Bali Musar say, it's not for me, I'm not on anywhere near such a level. But and they say, and I don't know what they mean, so when the Bali know who, what, but I heard like in the name of the Bali Musar, the people who are very involved in Musar, Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, so movement, said that even if we were to get rewarded for sin and punished for mitzvah, a Jew should do the mitzvah because it's the right thing to do. Okay, so we can't be like that. We discussed earlier the connection, but in other words, to be a Yirei is mean to understand what you're doing, the sin is wrong. To be a Yirei Elohim, it's just I fear God isn't going to strike me with lightning, so that I can fear. Anyway, so a bor is not even derech eretz. An Am Haaretz can't be a Hasid. So what's an Am Haaretz? So an Am Haaretz, and first you say, there are many different definitions of Am Haaretz in the Gemara. Sometimes an Am Haaretz means a non-observant Jew. Sometimes it means a not learned Jew. Sometimes it meant he didn't give truma to masrot. He wasn't careful about that. The Gemara sometimes means he belittles Torah, and it's always Am Haaretz doesn't always mean the same thing in every context. But in this context, he says, Lo Haaretz Chasid. The way the Tiferet Yisrael explained to, I think in many ways it's a beautiful explanation. I would say it applies to many, many, many Jews in the world today. It's been maybe in our generation a little bit less, but for sure in the generation after World War II, and for many generations in Europe, where only the elite of the elite got a serious Jewish education. You got your Jewish education by osmosis, by living in the shtetl. Only the elite and the wealthy, as we've discussed, could learn in yeshivot. So he says an Am Haaretz is a person, he's a nice guy, the developed character, but he didn't learn Torah, he didn't get a Jewish education. He went to public school. His parents couldn't afford, whatever, he came, he didn't have the opportunity, but he learned basic human decency. He's an Am Haaretz, he's the person of the land, he's a regular nice guy, but he's not a not learned. So he can be a great guy. He just can't be a Hasid. What does it mean to be a Hasid? So he says a Hasid means to act lifnim meshurut hadin. So I don't know, when's the last time we spoke about lifnim meshurut hadin? I seem to remember we did speak about it a few weeks ago. I should check in my notes, actually. But lifnim meshurut hadin, going beyond the letter of the law, doing more than you have to. So that's what a Hasid means you do more than you have to do. So I mentioned a few weeks ago the classic case, the most famous case of lifnim meshurut hadin in the Talmud is I think the wine barrel case, right, where you have poor workers working all day, and at the end of the day they dropped a barrel of wine. The barrel of wine is worth $1,000. They were making $100 a day. So the boss, who was a rabbi, Rabbi Baruch Hana, took their coats as a collateral. These people, they said, what do you mean? I don't owe you $100. You owe me $1,000. You broke my wine. And the law is you cause damage, you have to pay. There's no accident, right? So the poor workers went running to Rav, and Rav said, he said, what happened? He took him coats. So Rav said, give him back his coat. He said, give him back his coat. Is that the law? I said, no, that's not the law. But you have to go beyond the law. You have to act lifnim meshurut hadin. And then he said, we want to get paid. So the boss said, get paid? Are you out of your mind? It's bad enough you have to pay me. It's one thing. Okay, I'm not going to charge you. And there's no way in the world I'm paying you. So Rav said, pay them. He says, pay them. Is that the law? I said, yeah, that's not the law. But lifnim meshurut hadin. The truth of the matter, if you look carefully in the Gemara, they don't say lifnim meshurut hadin. They quote a pasuk of Orchot Tzadikim. I don't remember now the whole pasuk. Pasuk, I believe in Mishlei. The pasuk about you have to walk in the way of the righteous. Tosfot explains this is already a very high level of lifnim meshurut hadin. Lifnim meshurut hadin means I find a lost object. It's after a year, I can keep it, and then the owner comes a year later, and I know who the owner is, but it's been a year already. I don't have to give it back to him. So lifnim meshurut hadin, I should give it back to him. It doesn't really cost me money. I'm not taking the excess. But here I'm losing $1,000 in my company, losing $1,000 because of my workers. So that's already much higher. That's even to be a tzaddik, to be a real pious person. So the Gemara doesn't quote the pasuk Vasita Hayashar Vatov. That's the pasuk. There's the one in Yitro that the Gemara uses for the lifnim meshurut hadin. They quote this at a higher level. Now what's fascinating, I assume this is the law in every Western country. When a worker causes damage at work, it's the employer who pays, I think, in Canada, I assume, right? The work boss, by an accident, it's the boss pays. He gets paid. The boss can fire the worker, but he's got to pay him for his day of work. I think that this aspect of lifnim meshurut hadin is being incorporated into the Western world, I think, as I understand how the legal system works. But that's the high-level case of lifnim meshurut hadin. That's the famous case in the Gemara. Now, of course, it's because they were poor. The owner was wealthier. If sometimes the workers have more money than the boss, depending on what's going on. So then probably Rav wouldn't have told him to pay. Depends on the situation. And it was an accident. It wasn't negligence. It was an accident. So every case is judged differently. The case the Ramban gives for bar mitzvah, a much harder case. I mentioned that. I don't think I mentioned the wine barrel case, but I believe I mentioned bar mitzvah a few weeks ago. That's the law that if I'm selling my house, so I'm going to say a piece of property, I have to offer it to my neighbor first. So he can build a monster home. Maybe I shouldn't talk like that, but he can build whatever, so he can expand his farm, and I can't charge him more. As long as he matches what the next best offer is, because obviously the neighbor, he'll pay more. He'll pay $1.3 million. Everybody else will only pay $1 million. I can only charge my neighbor $1 million. He's willing to pay $1.3 million. So the lifnim meshurut hadin, I can't do that. So that's already, that people I mentioned, that people go, whoa. That not how our marketplace works. It's fair. It's a totally fair deal. He wants to pay $1.3 million. I lucked out. Hey, it's great. My neighbor wants the property, right? You hold out, a big company. That's why people do numbered companies all the time, because they want to buy things. They don't want people to know who they are. Because if you find out that Warren Buffett is about to invest in your company, you're going to charge more. You're going to raise the price a little because, he can afford it. He really wants it. If you're dealing with some guy you never heard of, you're not going to do that. So the lifnim meshurut hadin, it's a little bit different than our business structure works. So the commentary says that it says that to be a Hasid, you have to see it in action. You have to do shimush chachamim. You have to, in other words, you can't learn about it. You have to sit by the feet of Rav Moshe Feinstein, and you have to see Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, or Rav Soloveitchik. You have to see how they deal with people. You have to see how amazing they are, their sensitivity to people, and then you'll learn by experience. So an Am Haaretz doesn't have that. Am Haaretz, the people of the land, he doesn't have exposure to great Torah scholars. So that's how the Tiferet Yisrael beautifully, I think, explains. Lo Am Haaretz Hasid. An Am Haaretz can be a really fine person, It's a regular person, not so educated, not his fault. Very few people, they didn't have education for everybody, and got a basic education. It's a nice person, but he can't really understand. He doesn't have that quite sensitivity. The Gemara says, Gadol shimusha yoter milimuda. You learn more, it's greater to service a Torah scholar than to actually learn from his Torah. Learning Torah, we know, informal education, right? Eating supper, going to some great rabbi. It doesn't have to be a great rabbi. It can be in any field, but here we're talking about in the Torah field. You go to a great Torah scholar, someone who's totally sensitive. You go to Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, right? So Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, the famous story. He was when he washed his hands, he would only wash the first knuckles, right? You're supposed to wash the whole hand. So they say, somebody was at his house, I think. They asked him, he said, what we're talking about? In order to get water, the maid, the servant has to go to the well for 5 minutes. Why should I waste water? I'm not going to be strict on people's house. Or the famous story, they have like Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach was going to visit somebody, and he heard a woman singing as he was coming to the house, so he wouldn't knock on the door. It didn't say he ran away. That's not what the story goes. Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach didn't want to go into the house because he knew it was a religious woman. He knew with the Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach walking into the house, she'd stop to sing immediately. And he felt that was inappropriate. She wants to sing, let her sing. He'll wait, and then they'll go to the house. I mean, little stories. There are thousands of stories like this. So even though, you have to know not every story is 100% the way they say it, of course. But like they always say, they don't say stories like that about me. But to be a lifnim meshur adin is not something you can learn. It's you have to experience. And therefore, Amma Aretz doesn't have that ability. Okay, but he's better than a boor. Lo abai shalame, that's the most people today. Lo abai shalame, this is especially true by adults. And if you're shy, you can't learn, right? People, that's one of the advantages of kids. Kids don't have any shame. So, I mean, sometimes shame is good, but sometimes shame is bad. So, lo habaysh and lo made, because, people are often afraid to ask questions because they show their ignorance, which sometimes is actually true. It does show their ignorance a little bit, but I shouldn't say that. But it's but if you don't ask, if you're too embarrassed to ask, if you're too worried about what people are going to think about you, and you're worried about what's he going to say, you're never going to learn. This is very simple. That doesn't need an explanation. A shy person can't learn. That goes without saying. Can't be embarrassed. And if we know, everybody who teaches adults know, and who teaches kids, like I do both. So the difference. One of the key differences. Adults are more interested. The kids got interested more. They're there because they have to be there. Some kids love it. Some kids wonderful. But you have a much greater influence on kids. Anybody who teaches knows that your influence on kids. I mean, people like to teach adults because the adults are interested. They're more sophisticated. It's easier, whatever. But for sure, teaching kids is more rewarding, done properly, and you can have much greater influence. Adults are set in their ways. It's very hard to change adults. It's wonderful to teach, but it's when you teach kids, you can mold kids a little bit. I mean, in a positive sense. So, and kids are not embarrassed. Kids don't understand. Most kids, they don't. Some kids are, but other kids, they're not embarrassed. They'll make you explain something 100 times until they understand it, and that's good. That's good if need be. So, if you want to learn, don't be afraid to ask questions. Thank God in Zoom, if anybody, and I say this again, I'm not joking, really serious. If you have any questions, email me or whatever it's called. You chat me privately. I won't say who you are. I get the private. Nobody will know. So you can ask the question and you don't have to be embarrassed at all. So that's an advantage on Zoom when you can ask questions privately. Anyways, okay. So the loha kaptan milamed. A captain can't teach. What's a captain? How do you explain kaptan? It's not an easy word to translate. I only looked in one English translation for it. I don't have right. The RCA, like new sitter, I just looked what they said. If anybody want to tell me how we translate loha kaptan, one who's makpid, right? So often when halakhic terms we use it, he's very careful. He's makpid in halakha. He's very exacting, and which is generally used in a positive sense. Here it's said in a negative sense. In a kaptan. So the not the art scroll, I don't know how art scroll translates. I don't have my sitter in front of me. The RCA sitter translated as irritable. An irritable person, someone who's a nitpicker. Okay. Quick, impatient. I think that's the more common one. An impatient person, good. But I found that RCA translation irritable. You can irritate him very quickly. And that's based on some of the commentaries say a captain, fascinating, one who has a temper. One who has a temper cannot teach.
Could it be pedant? Could it mean pedant?
Could it mean what?
Pedant.
I'm sorry,
Being pedantic, someone who's pedantic.
Oh, pedantic, yes. That's what something, you can't be too exacting. You have to give kids a little bit of room. They're not just kids, adults. They, sometimes a teacher explains something, not everybody's a Rav Soloveitchik. Nobody's a Rav Soloveitchik. People, if you remember one thing from the shiur, you go to a shiur, it's very nice, enjoy it. You ask somebody what they talk about, they can tell you 1-2 points. It's okay. That's all right. That's ain't a kapta melamed. If you're too insistent that the student know everything, that is how some explain it. Now it's all connected, right? One who's impatient, 100%. Various commentaries explain it various ways. So one of them is saying, Captain, he doesn't like questions. He wants to give his lecture. He doesn't want questions. No, you can't teach that way. It's all about, of course, it goes together with Ein HaBaishan Lamed. The teacher has to encourage the students. The students shouldn't feel embarrassed to ask, right? There's a warmth. Ein HaKaptan Melamed. You're irritable. You're impatient. You're too exacting. You don't give the kids any slack. And kids are kids. They're gonna, they're not gonna pay attention the whole time. That's the adults are adults. People are people. That's the way it is. It's okay. And then the commentaries point out another problem. A kaptan, one who's very, very strict and but got to be exactly like this. Like when even makbid and halacha can have a negative association. What do you mean makbid and halacha? That's halacha exactly like it says. The Mishur Adin is you don't do halacha exactly as it said. You have to look at the bigger picture, like we said before, Rav Zcharia ben Avkulis. The mum on the animal, yes, if I looked in Hilchot Bechorot, maybe I can't be makbid the animal, but I looked in Hilchot Dina de Malchut Dina and Hilchot Shalom Malchut, so now I have to take a broader expanse of the halacha. I'm not so makbid. I'm not makbid, I have a broader, so when a person is very makbid, it's not good. Even when he says makbid halacha, I mean, he looks in the Mishnah Berurah exactly, but he sometimes loses the big picture. But some explain when a person is makpid, he's so demanding and strict, students aren't going to like him. And this is also, I would say, in modern education, and it's something I probably changed from when I first started as a teacher. When I first started teaching, I was sort of had the impression, and other people told me this, so the kids don't have to like you. Kids have to respect you. The students, otherwise they're not going to care what you say. They're not going to learn from you. You're not the kids' friends. They don't have to like you. Who cares? And I think that was the sort of old style. I think in today, you teach anybody who teaches in high school, the kids have to like you. If you want to learn, if you want the kids to learn, they have to like you. You have to be friends. So well known, Rav Soloveitchik, they tell the story. He asked his, I don't know who he asked, his son, his grandson. I don't know. I assume it. I assume he knew this later. The story doesn't sound right, but he wanted to know how to play baseball. They didn't play baseball in Kaslavich. I can guarantee you, Salvation never played baseball in Kaslavich, and he probably didn't play baseball in Berlin either. And nobody plays baseball in Berlin. But he came to America, Boston Red Sox, the Red Sox hadn't won a World. The whole Rav Soloveitchik never saw the Red Sox win the World Series. 1918. Okay, now I'm talking baseball a little too much, but 1918, and then the Red Sox didn't win again, of course, for 86 years or something till 19. When did they win the World Series? 2004, I think the first time. And of course, the Chicago Cubs won after 108 years. So, sometimes it takes a long time. Anyways, the Rav said he wanted to know baseball. Why? Because that's what kids talk about. That's what kids talk about. So he had to know if you want to relate to people. And a great teacher always uses modern metaphors, often uses modern examples. People are interested in literature. Well, you have to know who your audience is. You have to know what excites people. So, but that's what some of the commentaries say. If you're a kaptan, students aren't going to like you. And if students don't like you, they're not going to learn so much. They'll turn you off. And they quote, Divrei Chachamim benachat nishmaim. That's the exact opposite of being a kaptan. A kaptan is one who's very strict and exacting, and nachat is easygoing. The words of Torah, divrei chachamim, the words of the wise, the nachat nishmaim, are only heard if they're spoken in comfort and beautiful, and that's why it's the same Rav who we talked about who spent 18 months on a farm. So the Gemara says that Rav, before he started every shiur, would say a joke. Everybody knows that. A good speaker starts every lecture with a joke. You get the audience, into it. So he would start every shiur with a joke. And I remember Rav Shechter, those of you who know Rav Shechter, heard him speak, he has a wonderful sense of humor. And he cracks jokes all the time. And then sometimes you have to get the jokes. But and I remember he told us once in shiur that there's a machloket. Was he only allowed to tell a joke at the beginning of the shiur to sort of put the mood? But once the shiur starts, Torah is really serious. There is an idea of Torah, barakat, the ema, with fear and trembling. That is, again, every idea that we talk always has the idea and the opposite. Thesis, and we all have this in everything. So there is a notion, learning Torah with like ema and fear, or no, you can tell jokes even in the middle of the shiur. So I guess Rav Shechter held you can tell jokes even in the middle of the shiur, because maybe at one time one joke was enough to keep people interested. Today you have to tell more jokes. You have to tell to keep people interested. Whatever the case is, but Eina Kapta Milamed, it's very important, and it's not everybody can be a teacher. We already discussed. If you don't, and it's connected, of course. If you don't, what we said before. If you don't speak clearly, if you're not articulate and you're not clear, then obviously you cannot be a teacher. Okay. Lo kol hamarbe b'schor machim. Again, I love the language of the Mishnah. Lo kol hamarbe b'schor machim. The other one, the Baishan can't learn, a captain can't teach, and Amaretz can't be a Hasid, and Bur Yerei Hasid. So it should say, the lo hamaschir machim. The one in business doesn't get smart. That's not what it says. It says, lo kol, it's much longer, and it's sort of more nuanced. Lo kol hamarbe b'schor machim. Not everybody who does a lot of business becomes smart. Of course, what does that mean? It means many people do. In other words, lo kol hamar. In other words, not all the wisdom in the world is found on Bay Street or Wall Street or, in the office. But there is wisdom there. Lo kol hamar be. In other words, don't think, we're talking about learning. Baisha, Lomaid, everybody has to find time. Bored, don't be a bored, don't be an amaretz. So what do people think? Okay, so I'll get an education, I'll get a job, I'll learn everything I know. I'm street smart. No street, so he said, that's very nice. It doesn't say if you engage in business, you don't learn. That's not true. But it just says you don't get all, no kol hamar b'schur machim. Not everybody does. Not everybody does, and not at all the time. And can't get all your wisdom from business. Business can be, like we said, it's the first question before they asked if you learn Torah. Were you honest in business? The honest businessman, that's the ideal. That's not just businessman. The honest worker, that's higher than I think it is higher than we need the Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbachs and Rav Soloveitchiks and Rav Moshe Feinsteins. We need one in 10,000 people to sit in Kollel to make to be supported however they need, $250,000, $500,000 a year if they have 8 kids, whatever they need. For the 1 in 10,000 is too many. The 1 in 100,000, so that would give you. I'll give you 130 people. Yeah, we don't need more than 130 poskim in the world. People, whatever it is. To sit and learn. But for most people, the highest level is not to sit and learn. The highest level is to put Torah into practice. And the first question is nasata v'natata be'emunah. And the way we demonstrate, I always like to explain it. Most people explain nasata v'natata be'emunah. Were you honest in your business dealings? And of course, it means that. Now we know masa matan, even that word is fascinating. Masa means to lift up. A nasi, the nasiim, is a president. The nasim, the tribes, they're the one lifted above. They are the leaders. Masa matan means business, that's the term we use. It's supposed to lift you up. It's supposed to elevate you spiritually. And masa umatan, and give. Business is an opportunity to give to others. That's what capitalism is all about. I create a business, I support people. So the term for business dealings, masal matan, is such a beautiful term. I lift up and I give. That's the term for masal matan. So nasata v'natata, did you lift up and give be'emunah? Honestly, that's the way it's normally explained. And of course, that's one of the things it means. But it means much more than that. It means emunah. What does the word emunah mean? Emunah means faith. Are you a mamin? Do you believe in God? Nasata, does your business demonstrate that you believe in God? Because the Gemara says that how much money we make is determined by God. Yeah, we have to work. Of course, money doesn't grow on trees, but we know that ultimately, that's many times, our success is only up to God. Our efforts are up to us. Our success is up to God. For every brilliant businessman, every multimillionaire businessman, there's somebody just as smart, just as good in business, just good in everything, and whatever. I don't have to. You built up a great travel. You're in the tourism industry. You're the greatest, the sharpest. No, that's it. Your business is kaput now. There's so much beyond our control. So it's all really up to God. Yes, we have to put in our efforts. But so when a person cheats, that means he doesn't really believe that God is the one who gives us our parnasa. So our masa matan, that's why it's more important than learning Torah. The guy in business, he's an atheist. He may put on tefillin, he may wear his talis over his head, big black kosher. Now we all cheat a little. We're human beings, okay? But we know there's a difference between a little here and a little there, and someone who's meticulously honest. Rav Moshe Feinstein, Rabbi Tendler told us, his son-in-law, Rav Moshe Feinstein would not put his charitable donations on his tax return. So I'm not Rav Moshe Feinstein. I don't recommend this for normal people, but for Rav Moshe Feinstein, it's fine. Why not? Because Rav Moshe Feinstein knew that not every money you give to tzedakah goes to tzedakah. It goes to the CEO. The tzedakah has a nice office and he makes a lot of money. I mean, and he flies first class. And maybe that's all justifiable. I'm not even saying it's not justifiable sometimes. And that's not our discussion here. But Rav Moshe said, the government shouldn't pay for it. I can't claim my taxes back from the government because so some guy can have a nicer office or he gets his cell phone paid for by the charity instead of paying for himself. So it's not for normal people. But that's Rav Moshe Feinstein. That's what I'm saying. You want to know Lifnim Yishur Din. If you live with Rav Moshe Feinstein, you become a Hasid. That's exactly what the Mishnah says. You become a Hasid, you have to see this in action. So I remember Rabbi Tendler telling us that story about Rav Moshe. Again, the hundreds. Anyway, so that's it's what can I so nasata v'natata b'emunah. The way we deal in business really displays our faith in God. And that's why it's the first question. So, and then you get to Kaveti Yitim Torah. Then did you study Torah once you get back? So business, being honest in business is the greatest Kiddush Hashem we can make. And the Gemara says that. To love God means when people, that's Gemara in Yuma says, how do you fulfill the mitzvah to love God? When people see that you're honest in business and you're nice and you're friendly, what a great, the guy learns Torah and he's so honest. I want to be an observant Jew. They don't say he knows Shas. I want to be like that. That's not what people say. People say I want to be honest. So the highest level is to be a nasata v'natap. So the Mishnah doesn't want to say if you're involved in business you won't become smart. The Mishnah doesn't want you to be a boor. It doesn't really want you to be an Amaretz. It's okay, but it would prefer more. It doesn't want you to be a Baishan, and it doesn't want you to be a Kaptan, but it does want you to be involved in Schora. So therefore, it just tells you, Lo kol hamar b'schora. Don't think that all wisdom is found in the business world. There's wisdom in the Torah world, and not every, and of course, what it means, I think, in modern terms, not everybody who's a multimillionaire has any brains on their head. Like we all know that somebody, whatever it is, he had a ton there, he got lucky, whatever it is, he made $1 million. We know some, if you have a lot of money, you can say whatever you want. You can talk like an idiot and then you can get away with it because you have a lot of money. It's not good, or it's just the way, I think. I don't know if you want to say I'm wrong, but I think that's how the world works. So don't think just because Hamar Beb is Choraj, just because he made a lot of money that he's smart. That's another way of looking at the Mishnah. Not necessarily true. Very well known, Oshen Anashim. I wonder if other Mishnah says Ish. In the place where there are no people, Hishtadel Liot Ish. You should try to be famous. You have to step up to the plate. This is also spiritual, like the whole way about leadership. Talking, somebody's got to take the bull by the horns. People don't want to be the president, and people don't want to be involved in their shul and their school. It's often it's very hard for organizations to find people to get involved. So you have to do it. And of course, the key word, what we've been alluding to, is hishtadel. Whether you'll be successful, we can't give you any guarantees. That's not up to you. That's not up to us. So you have to try. That's all God wants from us. That's all society. That's all an organization can ask for you. To try your best. Hishtadel liot ish. You should try to be a person. Okay, I'll just say one more point and then we'll wrap up. The next Mishnah is by Hillel. It's in it's in Aramaic. He saw a guy. Maybe I'll save that till next week. I see it's already 10:25. Maybe one or two questions I think I want to get to. Perfection, the enemy of good. Yeah, we spoke about that. That perfection, the enemy of good, but good is the enemy of great. It's easier to educate the uneducated than to change someone's character. So that's also, I think, a famous comment of Rabbi Salanter. He said it's easier to learn the entire Shas, the entire Talmud. It's to go to Daf Yomi, and not so hard. I mean, relatively speaking. But to change one character trait is much harder. Of course, it's much harder. That's why character traits are much more important, and character traits get instilled at a much younger age. By the time we're adults, it's very, very hard. The kids, even by high school, it's pretty late. It's probably too late, really, for most people. So character, and that's why I'll just quote Rav Chaim. Like we started by quoting Rav Chaim Soloveitchik. On the pasuk Naseh Adam B'Tzalmenu, right, the beginning of Bereshit. Let us make man. So of course we know it's the famous problem. That's heretical. What do you mean, let us make man? Who's God talking to? His second God. He has an assistant God with him. Let us make man. So Rashi says it comes to teach us. I'll say it comes to teach us. He consulted with the angels, teaches man that before you make a decision, consult. You want to be successful, consult with other people. So God is teaching us this point. He didn't need to consult, but he wants us to learn that. So Rav Chaim Soloveitchik point out something obviously. In other words, but you may become a heretic. People who read this verse, maybe not, we may benefit, but sure, people read, there are many gods. Naseh Adam B'Tzalmenu. So now that's less important. What's more important is proper character. To teach proper character is more important than teaching our religious beliefs. That's how the Ran explains, although I don't know how it fits, but explains why Avraham Avinu didn't want Yitzchak to marry somebody local, went to the family, because he thought that he said the family, even though they were worshipped idols, whatever, that didn't matter. That you can always discuss. That's how the Ran, you can always convince somebody your philosophy is incorrect. You can debate philosophy. Character, you can never debate. Character, you can't change. So it's much more important to look at someone's character. Their beliefs are not, okay, so your hashkaf is different, big deal. But if the character is different, so that's not good. Somebody wrote me the term Hasid and Tzaddik get flipped one to the other from Talmudic times to now. Okay, I don't know, I have to think about it. Eliezer Berkowitz, not in heaven. Hasid on a Tzaddik, so I'm not exactly sure what that's referring to. They flipped from one to the other, okay? Quick and patient. Okay, let's just quickly do a quick review, and then we'll wish everybody a good Shabbos. So we began by talking, don't say things that can't be heard, that can be heard, that will be heard, whatever it means. So the laws of ears, be very careful, and that leaders have to be very articulate, and you have to really know how to speak clearly. And when you write a book, you have to be very careful that everything's 100 clear. You have to review 100 times. And the parts of the Talmud weren't even properly edited because of historical circumstances. We discussed the born and Amaretz, one who has nothing and one who has at least the ways of the world in him, and somebody can actually fear God without fearing sin. He can fear punishment, but the idea is not to fear punishment, it's to fear sin. It's in order to be a Hasid, you have to see great people in action. You can't read about it in the books. Torah knowledge you can read about in the books, but action, character, you have to see in action. And what makes a good teacher and a good student, students have to be never afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid. Don't be embarrassed. Ask them privately if need be. And of course, a teacher can't be impatient, has to get along with the students. The students have to like him. He has to be friendly. He has to talk baseball or Aristotle with them, depending what type of student you have. You have to talk to them. The importance of taking our leadership roles. So that's, again, we always seem to cover one or two Mishnayot, always a little less than I plan to, but because there's always so many interesting things. And even I think, these ideas are, some are well known, but they're all well known perhaps, but it's very important and to go over them. And of course, the notion of emunah and the importance of business and Torah scholar. And this is it's for sure this, the ideal in the Mishnah, the Gemara, of course, everybody went to work. They didn't have a society where people sat and learned. We know every great rabbi in the Talmud worked. This one was a shoemaker, this one was a blacksmith, everybody worked. So the Gemara had tremendous respect for that. They just wanted the business people to put Torah first. Don't think it's all found in business. Okay, I want to wish everybody a good Shabbos just before we end, and thank you. Some of you have written me comments on my father. He read the Ksubah at their wedding. Yeah, my father was a great person. What can I say? did tremendous things for the community in Toronto and beyond, very involved in special education. I mean, the rabbi came to a shul of 50 people, and when he retired, there were 1,500 families in the shul. He built up the shul, went knocking on doors in 1959 when he came to Toronto. And anyway, so thank you.